So let's talk about the action taken by these officers first. Well, they would feel their point in laying down their weapons. What did you make of that? Was that going too far?
I mean, they're fine people. I see them in and around Parliament very frequently. But the fact is that the police obviously can't have a veto over prosecution decisions to charge police officers. And if what they intended to convey by handing in their guns was that police officers should never be charged, well, that's not something which any prosecutor or any justice system could ever accept. I mean, these decisions are given to the statutory prosecutor. I've no doubt this one was decided at the very highest levels, probably approved by the Director of Public Prosecutions himself because of its sensitivity. So it's gone through the process. It's now with the courts. It's up to the courts to decide whether this charge is rightly brought or not. And I don't think that individual police officers, fine men and women as they may be, should be involving themselves in this way. That's not their constitutional role.
Yeah.
And it's not a role we'd want the police to have. The police obviously cannot be the people to decide whether other police officers are charged or are not charged with criminal offences.
That's interesting. I mean, Lord MacDonald, you know better than I do that we have an active case here. An officer has been charged with murder. We must say nothing, and we'll say nothing that might prejudice a future case. But we're talking about the general principles in play here. And your view is that the action taken by these officers was wrong, and you also feel the idea of giving more guarantees to those officers when it comes to executing their duty. You think those guarantees are not reasonable?
Well, no one can have guarantees. I mean, we've always lived by the principle in the United Kingdom that police officers are citizens in uniform. In other words, they are subject to the law in the same way that anybody else is. But in this sort of situation, police officers have available to them the defence of self-defence, which is a very broad and generous defence, which probably explains why so few police officers are charged with criminal offences. And that defence basically says that if a person who's facing a threat does no more than they instinctively feel is necessary to protect themselves or other people, then that's the strongest evidence a court can have that they're acting in lawful self-defence. So the police have those guarantees, if you want to call them that, in the same way that everybody else does. But there are always two sides here. There's a police officer and there's someone who's died who has family and friends and loved ones left behind. And so I don't think it's right to suggest that the police should be put in a special position and be given special protection against prosecution. I think if people break the law, then prosecutors are asked to determine whether they should be charged or not. That, of course, doesn't mean that anyone's guilty if they're charged. It simply means that the case will go to a court where the issue will be ventilated in front of a judge and a jury. And that's what will happen in this case, as it happens in all criminal cases, and it's the right way to proceed.
Well, you'd think the Home Secretary, who's a lawyer, who's a former Attorney General, would be aware of all of that.
I mean, I think her intervention was a little unwise, frankly. She has to tread a fine constitutional line here. I mean, obviously, she has responsibility for public safety and some responsibility for the police, but she knows perfectly well that the decision to prosecute is not hers. It's a decision made by a prosecutor who's deliberately independent, and she shouldn't say or do anything which undermines decisions made by independent bodies who are given the statutory power to make those decisions. So I can understand she wanted to say something which would be of comfort to the police, and that's fine. That's her job as a Home Secretary. But she certainly shouldn't say anything which would seem to stray into a criticism or an approval, indeed, of a decision made by a prosecutor. This is for a court to consider now, no one else.
I mean, what harm could flow from the Home Secretary speaking out in the way that she did?
Well, I don't think any harm will flow in this case because we're a long way off anything happening in court and people's memories fade. But I do think that she should be a bit more careful about her public interventions, because it's always possible in the future, if she's not more guarded, that she could do real harm to a criminal case. And that would obviously be disastrous for her as well as for the community at large.
All right.